Hey everyone, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the ulna and radius, and depending on how bad I need a drink of water by that point, maybe the hand as well. So let's get going. So we're going to start off with the ulna, which is the medial bone in the forearm. We'll go ahead and label the olecranon process. So I don't color over some other structures. I'm just going to put a circle like this, and that's just sort of indicates that, this whole area here is the olecranon process. It's this big thing, you can feel it. It's what you think of as your elbow, that bone in the back of your elbow. That's the olecranon process. It's where your triceps attach, actually. The coronoid process, oops, you know what though? Let me just fix one little thing. I'm sorry if you just colored on your notes. I'm going to leave just the bottom bit out there so that I can label this the coronoid process. Now, from a side view, it makes this little hook, and that hook wraps around our trochlea and makes our elbow really stable. Let's go ahead and color this in. That is our trochlear notch. That is the notch I was just talking about that wraps around the trochlea. This next structure is called the ulnar tuberosity. It's a pretty big attachment, actually. It's where your brachialis attaches, the main muscle that bends your elbow, not your biceps, contrary to popular belief. It's your brachialis that does most of your elbow flexion. Radial notch, we will have to sort of imagine a little bit here. So it's right, this is a right ulna, which means that the radius is lateral to it, so right here. And then if we flip it over to the posterior view, it'd be right here. That's where the head of the radius articulates with the ulna, the radial notch. All right, the next structure is the supinator fossa. A muscle called supinator attaches there. So it's a nice name, that makes sense. These are easy to mix up on the bone, and of course I used orange and red for ulnar tuberosity and supinator fossa. But there's a line that divides them called supinator crest, and that is the proximal end of the ulna. The shaft, like all the long bones of the upper and lower extremities, the shaft is going to have borders and surfaces. So we have this very sharp border here, which is the lateral border. It's the border that is tugged on your whole life by the interosseous membrane, so it becomes very sharp. And you'll see in the model what I mean by that. I'm trying to write an L and a B right there for lateral border. This is anterior border. It is awfully hard to write with the mouse, I'm sorry. Posterior border. This is anterior surface, medial surface, and posterior surface there. So this would be your anterior border right here. Struggling a bit, sorry. Your posterior border. This is your lateral border. And your medial border. I'm sorry, guys. Did I just say medial border? That's not a thing. We have a medial surface and a lateral border. So here's your posterior border. There's your lateral border. You can't see your anterior border. The model, I think, is a better place if that's a little confusing to take a look at those. So we're done with the shaft. Let's go to the distal end. The head is this whole area down here, the head of the ulna. And then you have a styloid process here, which you can feel on your own wrist, on the inside of your wrist, the medial side of your wrist, I should say. So that's the styloid process. And then the articular surface, which actually doesn't do much articulating actually, but it sort of does with your triquetrum, I believe, one of your carpal bones. There's actually something called the triangular fibrocartilage complex right there. So it's sort of an indirect articulation, but anyway, it's called the articular surface for whatever reason. So, and that is it for the ulna. Let's go ahead and move on to the radius. So the head of the radius is this whole area up here. You can palpate that as well. If we were in class together, I would show you. It's a little tough to explain. Here's the head from a posterior view. On the top of the head, there's this little circular depression where the capitulum articulates. That's called the fovea. The neck is below. So this is the neck of the radius right here. Oops. And then we have the, oh boy, let's try that again. Then we have the radial tuberosity right here, where one of the attachments of your biceps is there. Okay, let's do borders again really quick. So this is anterior border, posterior border, and medial border, which points towards the ulna. This is anterior surface, posterior surface, and lateral surface. The anterior surface is really obvious on the radius, so that's kind of nice. Anterior border is here. Lateral border is there. It's very sharp. Posterior border we can't see in that view. And it's so indescript over here. It's tough for me to say, but let's go with posterior border right there. Oops, ran out of mouse cord, sorry. And again, you'll take a closer look at that in our videos. So that's the shaft. The ulnar notch is the next structure here. So the ulna articulates right here, distally. It also articulates at the radial head. The radial notch of the ulna attaches to the radial head. But distally, the head of the ulna articulates here at the ulnar notch. So that's kind of interesting. So the radial notch and radial head articulate proximally. The ulnar head and the ulnar notch articulate distally. You'll be able to see that better in our model video. So there it is, ulnar notch. It's this kind of smooth surface right there. Styloid process is a big structure. You can feel it on the outside of your wrist. It's right there. Lister's tubercle, also called dorsal tubercle. Dorsal tubercle is actually a better name. So much stuff is named after anatomy, guys. It's right here. There's a muscle that kind of wraps around that. You can actually feel that on the back of your hand too if you take a little time to explore. The 4 grooves, don't worry about. You can't see them on the anatomy app. That brings us to scaphoid facet and lunate facet. These are 2 facets that articulate with our carpal bone. So this first one in green, I'm just trying to kind of illustrate that it's curved. You would need to look at this from an inferior view to really see it, which we will do in the Essential Anatomy app. But that first one's the scaphoid facet. And the next one, we'll use purple, is the lunate facet. And I'm going to draw the arrow on both just to kind of illustrate. We're looking at the side of it in this picture. And that is the radius. Let's take a look at the hand. This is kind of a simplified version of the hand. There's a lot of structures we don't cover, so hopefully that helps a little bit. These are both right hands. One's an anterior view and one's a posterior view. So what that means is that this would be lateral because these are our thumbs, and this would be medial because those are our pinkies. So that kind of helps us. When we're naming the rows of carpals that I'm about to teach you, we're always going from lateral to medial. So let's do that. This first bone here is called the scaphoid. It articulates with the radius at the scaphoid facet. That's where the name scaphoid facet came from. Oops, and let's label that. It can also be called navicular. There's a navicular in your foot though, so I think scaphoid's a better name. Here is your lunate, which articulates with the lunate facet. So those two bones articulate with the radius. Now we have our, oh, and I didn't, first of all, you can cross that out. We won't cover that. And I'll have to come back and label lunate. The next one is triquetrum. Oops, wrong color. Next one is triquetrum. Now the pisiform is blocking a lot of triquetrum, so let's color it in just so we can be clear what I'm talking about there. That's triquetrum. The pisiform is actually a floating bone. It's a sesamoid bone. It's right there. Now that is pink, but it looks a lot like the red right next to it. Sorry, guys. All right, so that is the proximal row. Let's go to the distal row, where we start with trapezium under the thumb. We don't need to do the tubercle. And then we go to, let's use green, should work. The next one is trapezoid. Trapezium and trapezoid are tough because they both start with the T and they're right next to each other. So you just have to remember that the trapezium is directly under the thumb. It's the first one in the distal row if we're going from lateral to medial. And then this next one is the largest carpal. Its name means head, capitate. Here it is. It has all sorts of articulations with these other bones. Capitate. And then lastly, we have the hamate, which we will do in this light blue color. There's hamate. And it has something called the hook of hamate on it. That's a part of your carpal tunnel, but don't worry about that. So that's it. Those are the 8, and there's a mnemonic for that. It's some lovers try poetry that they can't handle. There's a funnier version, but that is the PG one. Some lovers try poetry that they can't handle. So the S is for scaphoid, L is for lunate, T is for triquetrum, P is for pisiform, T is for trapezium, T is for trapezoid, C is for capitate, H is for hamate. Some lovers try poetry, and you start over on row 2, that they can't handle. So it's lateral to medial, proximal row first, then distal row. That helps. So then this hand here is turned over. So why don't you go ahead and try to label that on your own, and just remember now it's going from it's still going from lateral to medial. So don't start over here. You're always going from lateral to medial. So we name them, I'll put a little arrow. We name them proximal row first and then distal row second. So scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum. I'll just put a little mark, but try to label them on your own. So scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, pisiform, and then you start over trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate, lateral to medial, proximal to distal. And that's it for the carpals, which is definitely the hardest part of the hand. The rest is really easy. So they're named just based on what number finger they are. So your thumb is your first finger, index is number 2, middle is number 3, ring is number 4, pinky is number 5. So same over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first row of bones beyond the carpals are metacarpals, so we simply say metacarpal 1, metacarpal 2, metacarpal 3, metacarpal 4, metacarpal 5. Now this middle region where I put the X's, that's called the shaft. So if I put one of these on the test, you would say, hold on, let me finish here. Let's say I did this X right here. I shaded this area in. you would say that that is the shaft of metacarpal 2. If I put the X down here on any of these, you would say that's the base. So this is the base of metacarpal 5. And then if I did this distal region here, that'd be the head. So the head of metacarpal 1, 2, 3, or 5. Then we have our phalanges, singular phalanx. So this would be your first, this would be your first pair of phalanges. You have a proximal phalange, or proximal phalanx, and a distal phalanx in your thumb. The rest of the fingers have 3, a proximal phalanx, a middle phalanx, and a distal phalanx. So if I asked you what this was, you would say middle phalanx 5. If I asked you what this was here, you would say distal phalanx 3. This would be distal phalanx 1, proximal phalanx 1, metacarpal 1. You get the idea. If you guys have any questions about any of this, just reach out to me on Canvas, and let's go ahead and watch the model videos, hopefully to clear some of this up and give you a better view. Thanks, guys.